get a new Prime Minister. Gordon Brown will be in charge by mid-afternoon. I'm John Sopel, and we'll be bringing you all the day's events.
Good morning from Downing Street, where you can see the removal men already hard at work. I'm Matthew Amrodiwala. Tony Blair will leave here for his last Prime Minister's questions at 12 o'clock. He's also expected to be confirmed as a Middle East envoy within the next few hours.
And I'm Nicholas Witchell here inside Buckingham Palace, where Tony Blair will come formally to submit his resignation to the Queen. Shortly after that, Gordon Brown will be summoned. He will come. He will be invited by the Queen to form a government and become Prime Minister.
The other headlines here on BBC News 24. 4 people have died. Hundreds have spent a second night in shelters. As more heavy downpours could be on the way as Britain experiences the worst flooding in recent years.
Quicker and easier access to abortion. Doctors debate whether the current laws should be changed.
And in sport, get comfortable on the hill. Tim Henman is back on court today for his second round match at Wimbledon.
Hello and welcome to College Green here in the heart of Westminster on what promises to be a day of the highest political drama, because the Blair era, after a decade, is finally drawing to a close. Britain will have a new Prime Minister later today as Tony Blair hands over power to his Chancellor after those 10 years in office. Gordon Brown is already the leader of the Labour Party and he'll take over the running of the country this afternoon. Now, first, Tony Blair will go to the Commons for his last Prime Minister's questions. That's at midday. Then, later in the day, he'll be off to Buckingham Palace to see the Queen, where he will formally resign as Prime Minister. After that, Gordon Brown will be invited to the Palace, where the Queen will ask him to form a government. It's at that point that he becomes Prime Minister. Now, let us take you to the scene where we are speaking to you now, College Green in Westminster. Normally when we're down here you'll find the odd other camera crew. Not today. It's an absolute warren of tents that have been erected, camera crews everywhere, and we'll be talking to the key players here on Westminster throughout the day that have been vital to both Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. We'll also be live in Downing Street, where the removal men, as you can see, are hard at work. We've been seeing, it's a sort of vaguely humiliating scene in a sense, the departure of a Prime Minister. There is no privacy to it. You see the little possessions being taken out by the removal men, loaded into the back of the trucks. I remember this from 17 years ago when Margaret Thatcher's removal men came in after she had been brutally brought down. Now, Tony Blair is not going in that manner. But the departure, the removal men are there at the front of Downing Street. You can see all the photographers and camera crews lined up to record this historic moment. We can also see the scene from the sky, our helicopter overlooking Downing Street as well, where we'll be monitoring the comings and goings of the key players as Tony Blair will make his way there to Buckingham Palace at around lunchtime after he said his farewells to his staff. He'll bid farewell almost to the Commons when he does Prime Minister's questions at midday, then back to Downing Street and then to the Palace to formally resign as Prime Minister. We'll be watching every movement along the way of this extraordinary day, the first time in 17 years that we've seen a Prime Minister leaving office without there being a general election to herald the change. And I'm joined here on College Green by Baroness Morgan, Sally Morgan as was, who for 10 years was with Tony Blair through pretty tumultuous times, leaving in 2005. I mean, I suppose my first question is, how are you feeling today?
Feels rather strange, actually. It's been a long time coming, and it's been kind of very well planned and very orderly, but nevertheless today does feel odd. Yeah.
Sad?
Yes, it does feel sad. I mean, I think he's fine, and I think he's ready to go and move on to new things in a sense. But nevertheless, it is the end of an era. It's a long time.
I'd heard people saying that he was really struggling to focus on what was next because he was so busy, you know, whether it was climate change, whether it was the EU summit, whether it was domestic policy, that he hadn't actually thought that much about what was coming next.
I think he's only thought very recently that really that's it. I think you're right. I think for the last 6 months, or even the last 2 weeks, he's been incredibly focused. He was very clear that in his remaining months there were things he wanted to achieve. He was very clear he had to work hard on the G8, and he thought he could get a deal at the G8. And he was very clear he wanted to work on the EU summit, and he did that. So I think it's actually only since the beginning of the week that suddenly it's probably hit him.
How do you think he's going to be remembered as a Prime Minister? I know it's very early to make judgments, but one word, Iraq, isn't that his legacy?
I think at the moment that's the headline, but I really genuinely don't think how in the future that's how he'll be remembered. I mean, I think in one word, I suppose it's modernisation of Britain. I mean, when any of us look back to 1997 and you look at Britain now, the change is just huge, and we forget it. If you just go around any of our cities, you look at Manchester, you look at Leeds, they're just so completely transformed. And in 1997, we were arguing about whether the health service would survive, not about details of reform in the health service. And we've just become so much more socially liberal, which he's led very strongly from the front. So I think the country has been transformed and modernised to a degree that people will realise later.
But do you think he's haunted by Iraq?
I don't think he's haunted by Iraq, no. I think he's concerned by Iraq, worried by Iraq, desperately hopeful that it will, in the end, work out in the way that he hopes and there'll be a proper democracy. Haunted, no. He still believes that the decision was right, and he would still have taken that decision.
Now, he said to the British people in 2005 that he would serve a full term. This is nothing like full term. This is not the time of his choosing, is it, for him to go?
I think when he said a full term, that was what he hoped he'd achieve. I think having got halfway through the term, I think he's now quite happy that he's achieved enough. I think if he'd gone much before now, I think it would have been disappointing.
But let's be clear about this. There was a coup d'état against him last September, and that's why he's going now.
No, that's not true. That's not true. There have been rumblings and rustlings and a level of organisation. That is true. But he was in his head always clear that he wanted to do at least half the term, and that's what he's done. And I think over the last year, he set himself specific things he wanted to see through, big decisions he thought were necessary for the country, and he's made those decisions, and he's led the government in that way.
You're playing down what happened last September as just saying it was rustlings. I mean, it was more than that. There was an organised campaign to try and get him out. I mean, do you think that the Labour Party demeaned itself, and maybe some of Gordon Brown's supporters demeaned themselves in the manner in which they felled him?
I think it was disappointing that people did that, and I mean, in truth, I don't actually think that it made as much difference as people think. I mean, I can remember talking to him last summer before the summer holidays. He was already clear in his head that he was working out whether or not he should make an announcement to conference. He'd already, in essence, made the decision he'd be going at approximately this time. So, I mean, he was talking about this summer. Therefore, in a sense, I wish they hadn't done it, because actually, I don't think the end result was any different.
Just a very quick final thought. A lot's been made of Gordon Brown's personality. How easy did you find to work with him?
I think Gordon is terribly different than Tony. I mean, he's a more intense person in many ways. But on the range of things I was involved in, he was great to work with. And I actually think that we will see a very sort of smooth transition of power and indeed of policies. There'll be different challenges in the future, but the key issues I think they'll address in a very similar way. And I don't think we'll see the dramatic policy changes that some people were talking about a bit ago. I just don't think that'll happen.
OK, Sally Morgan, thank you very much indeed for joining us here. Well, let us go now to Downing Street, where the removal men are doing their work. It is a dramatic scene. Matthew Amroli-Waller is there, who's going to guide us through the day. Matthew.
John, thanks very much. Well, just in the last few moments, you saw the live pictures of that removals van. It has departed from Downing Street. John was talking about the vaguely humiliating nature of it all, and the running machine, the last thing into the van before the back was put up, and off it went through the gates of number 10. And just looking at the clock, we're less than 2 hours before Tony Blair makes his way to the House of Commons for his final Prime Minister's questions. His last appearance there in the Commons as Prime Minister. That'll be absolutely fascinating to watch. We're going to have plenty more analysis from here in just a moment, but first, Gary O'Donoghue, our political correspondent, has been taking a look at what lies ahead on this day.
A new dawn and a new era as Westminster prepares for the transfer of power from Tony Blair to Gordon Brown. It's been home for Tony Blair for the past 10 years. In purely electoral terms, the most successful Labour leader ever. And with the news that he may be stepping down as an MP too, his political friends say they'll miss him.
Yes, we will, because he's a good friend. And the thing is that most people in the constituency think of him as a friend. And he's really loved up here, so we'll certainly miss him.
The world's media are, of course, out in force for today's handover. A handover that Gordon Brown has waited years for. But his supporters say he's more concerned with what he can achieve than what his job is.
He's really focused on the challenges of the future and the changes he wants to make. The thing for Gordon has never been, you know, the job that you've got, the office you hold. It's been the work that you can do and the difference that you can make.
Tony Blair famously warned the Tory leader that the new Prime Minister would be a clunking fist he'd have to face. David Cameron says he's ready.
Oh, well, I'm looking forward to it. I think what really matters is going to be the setting out the alternative visions for Britain. I mean, I think he believes in big top-down state control, telling people what to do. I believe in social responsibility, passing power outwards and downwards to people. I think that's going to be the big division in politics, and I'm looking forward to it.
Come early afternoon, and Prime Minister Brown will be the new resident of Number 10, and a new political era will have begun. Gary O'Donoghue, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, with me here is our chief political correspondent, James Landale, and as you can see from over our shoulder, the removal van has gone, and very soon Tony Blair will follow.
Absolutely. It's one of the extraordinary things about the British unwritten constitution is that this is the way it's done. Although the extraordinary thing about this one is the Prime Minister is going partially voluntarily. It's the first time we've had this for a very, very long time. A voluntary resignation. Obviously, it was Harold Wilson was the last Prime Minister to do that. But I don't think he had quite so many cameras focused on his running machine and other things that still have been turfed out. I have to say, I'd expected them more to have been cleared out because this removal process has been happening for a long time now.
It is a day of great political drama, but at the end of it, with Gordon Brown installed, how difficult is it without actually the excitement of an election and then going through those doors?
Well, it's one of the factors of Gordon Brown's arrival here in Downing Street is that he has not been elected as leader of a party in a general election. He is taking over from an incumbent. That means that there will be a question for some voters of how much authority he has. There will be some people who say he could go for an election quite soon. His political opponents, both Sir Mingus Campbell of the Liberal Democrats and David Cameron, have already said he should go for an early election. I have to say that's fairly unlikely. The expectation is possibly next year. There's one simple fact at the moment. The Labour Party is broke. It has very few staff in there at the moment. It is in no fit state to run a campaign.
He has had just the most enormous time to sit there, consider what he's actually going to do when he actually gets in behind that door. Just in terms of the very first thing, cabinet reshuffles today, tomorrow, what are we expecting?
I have to say, well, the first thing he does when he goes through there is he's taken aside and he's given a briefing on how to press the nuclear button. It's one of the first tasks given to any new incoming Prime Minister, just in case something happens. So he'll have that military briefing and then he'll get down to sort of putting the finishing touches to his reshuffle. He's been thinking about it hard for the last 2 or 3 days, getting all the bits in place. I would expect 1 or 2 names to come out maybe later on today. The bulk of it will be tomorrow because there's a formal process to go through, but I wouldn't be surprised if we get some details tonight.
All right, James, much more from you in a short while, but let's head from here, from Downing Street, back to College Green and back to John.
Matthew, thanks very much indeed. Well, of course, the formality of today takes place at Buckingham Palace. That is where Tony Blair has to go. That is where Gordon Brown will go afterwards. And Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, is there for us now. Nick, what is the procedure that actually happens today?
John, we think at about 1:10 that Tony Blair will arrive here at Buckingham Palace. He will go to the King's door over there, the door to which he would normally go on Wednesday evenings for his audience with the Queen as Prime Minister. On this occasion, he'll be accompanied by Mrs. Blair. She will wait downstairs in the Equerries room. Tony Blair will go upstairs to the Queen's private audience room, and they will have really quite a brief conversation. He will simply say that he is resigning as Prime Minister. That will be the official business of resigning. Then, by convention, they'll be joined by Mrs. Blair. No doubt they'll have, again, a short conversation about what they're going to do now. Then they will leave. It'll be the first sight that we have of Tony Blair as an ex-Prime Minister. And curiously, of course, he will leave in a different vehicle to the one that he arrived in. He will no longer have the Prime Minister's limousine and all the security men who go with the Prime Minister, but he will have a separate vehicle, still, of course, security. They will leave Buckingham Palace then to their new life. A few minutes later, Gordon Brown will be summoned to the palace. He also will be accompanied by his wife Sarah. She will wait downstairs while he goes up to that audience room. And then again, it's just a conversation. There is no kneeling or kissing. If you've seen that scene from the film The Queen, in which the actor playing Tony Blair gets down on one knee and kisses the Queen's hand, that does not happen. The expression kissing hands is purely that, an expression. The Queen will invite Gordon Brown to form a government. By convention, she invites the person who can command the confidence of the House of Commons to form a government. That, of course, is the person who leads the largest party. That is Gordon Brown. He will be invited to form a government, therefore he becomes Prime Minister. After they've had that conversation, Mrs. Brown will join them, and then they will leave through the King's door there to the Prime Ministerial transport and off to Downing Street as Prime Minister.
And Nick, just another question on another phrase that we hear, the handing over of the seals of office. Do such things exist?
There are none. There are no seals of office. There is no kissing or kneeling. No, the Prime Minister does not have any seals. So there are no seals for Tony Blair to return. There are no seals for Gordon Brown to collect. It is purely done, as I say, on the basis of conversations. A conversation with the Queen in which she invites Gordon Brown to form a government.
OK, so no seals of office, no kissing of hands. Do you think there'll be much chat, or do you think it will just stick to the real formality of it all?
I'm sure with Tony Blair there will be that chat. You know, they obviously, after 10 years, they've had their weekly audiences. They will talk, of course, about what they're going to do now. With Gordon Brown, perhaps, he's also used to coming here as Chancellor to have audiences of the Queen, to explain, for example, every year what's in the budget ahead of going to the House of Commons to explain it all to the House. But yeah, there'll be conversations, but in the case of Gordon Brown, I'm sure that he will be anxious to get on with the job of Prime Minister.
OK, well, there we see the scene there at Buckingham Palace. An awful lot more still to come from us here at Westminster. I should just remind you that at 12 o'clock it's Prime Minister's Questions, Tony Blair's final appearance, where he has commanded the House of Commons, really, with his sort of mixture of theatrics and attention to the detailed policy questions. And opposition leaders have found it pretty hard to lay a glove on him. Perhaps the most successful person was William Hague, where he used humour to puncture some of the sort of Blair bubble very effectively. But did it make any difference? Well, not really in the 2001 general election, when, of course, Mr Hague was roundly beaten. Awful lot more still to come from us here at Westminster, but for the moment, it's back to you in the studio.
John Sopel, much more from him, obviously, throughout the morning and early afternoon here on News 24, where it is just coming up to 20 past 10. These are the headlines this morning. And the removal men have been hard at work at number 10 as the Prime Minister prepares to leave office after 10 years in power. Mr Blair is also expected to quit as an MP.
Gordon Brown is already the leader of the Labour Party, but he'll take over as Prime Minister when he meets the Queen at Buckingham Palace this afternoon.
And in other news, hundreds of families have spent another night in temporary shelters because of the floods in South Yorkshire. 4 people are now known to have died.
And the sports headlines. Tim Henman is due back on Wimbledon's centre court later today. The British number 2 defeated Carlos Moya 13-11 in the 5th set and will now play Feliciano Lopez in round 2. The BBC understands that David Morgan, the chairman of the England and Wales Cricket Board, is to become the next head of the game's world governing body, the ICC. And England lock Danny Grewcock is likely to be left out of the World Cup squad after losing his appeal against a 6-week ban for punching. Those are this morning's sports headlines. I'll be back with more later on.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's go straight back now to Westminster and rejoin John Sopel on this day of history. John.
Simon, thanks very much indeed. Well, I'm joined here by the former Conservative Party leader, Michael Howard. And Michael Howard, I guess if anyone knows Tony Blair, you do, because, I mean, you were against him when you were Tory Party leader, he was against you when you were Home Secretary, and he was against you when you were Employment Secretary. So you have a long history of jousting with Tony Blair. What do you think now as he leaves office after 10 years, 3 general election victories?
I think he will go down in history as the Prime Minister who squandered the best opportunity than I think any incoming British Prime Minister in living memory and probably beyond has had. When he came in 10 years ago, he had the benefit of a huge majority. He had a golden economic legacy from the previous government. He had tremendous goodwill, no doubt at all about that. And there was a great appetite for reform about. And it hasn't really happened. Of course, there are some good things that he's done, of course. But I think that the general view will be that he squandered that tremendous opportunity.
Leave Iraq to one side, but won't he be able to say, look, there's now peace in Northern Ireland, there's Martin McGuinness sitting around a table with Ian Paisley, there's a minimum wage, there's low unemployment, the economy is steady, there has been this stable non-inflationary growth that Britain has eluded Britain for hundreds of years in its economic history?
Well, certainly he deserves credit for Northern Ireland, absolutely. Of course, the whole process was started by John Major, but Tony Blair certainly deserves credit for continuing that. He and Gordon Brown together also deserve credit for giving the Bank of England the responsibility for setting interest rates. But there are question marks over our economic performance. We haven't been growing as fast as many other countries. The number of young people out of work and not in education hasn't gone down. And so there are real question marks about that. And if you look at the whole big question of reform of the public services, which is what I think he wanted to do, what he said he was going to do, what he was elected to do, that just hasn't happened.
But wouldn't you say that he has been the dominant political figure for the past decade?
I would. That's an entirely different point. You can be a dominant political figure and yet have very little to show by way of achievement. He has been the dominant political figure, and I would say that he's achieved that largely through his tremendous gifts as an actor. He is a brilliant actor, possibly only second to Bill Clinton, his mentor, of whom it was once famously said, he's the only man who could ever cry out of one eye.
Well, that's a great phrase. I've not heard that one. But in terms of the succession then, how do you think Gordon Brown will be different? I wonder whether the Tory party would prefer to be fighting Gordon Brown at the next election than Tony Blair.
Well, I don't know. I won't be in the forefront of that particular fight. We'll have to wait and see. I think that what we know of Gordon Brown, and in particular what we know about the way he's conducted himself at the Treasury, makes one doubt whether he will in fact be able to make the transition at all easily, whether he will be able to do the job of Prime Minister in the way in which it needs to be done. So there are real doubts about that, but we'll have to wait.
What do you mean in terms of
personality?
personality?
We're told, for example, that if he had a big decision to take, he'd take a couple of weeks over it, he'd push everything else to one side, he'd concentrate single-mindedly on that one decision. Well, perhaps you can do that at the Treasury. You certainly can't do that in number 10, when 6 decisions cross your desk every morning, all calling for an instant response.
And just in terms of the battle ahead, I mean, we've seen it incredibly, after 10 years of Labour in office, a Tory MP defecting to the governing party. Now, doesn't that show that the Conservative Party, while it may have made progress, is still locked in the old time warp battle of Europe and Euroscepticism?
I don't think it shows that at all. And if you really are trying to take Quentin Davis at all seriously, I suggest you look at the things he was saying about Gordon Brown not very long ago. He said Gordon Brown shouldn't be trusted to take care of anyone's finances, far less the country's. I tell you, though, what this does give rise to. There's a widespread suspicion in Westminster that this sort of thing is an element of the kind of corruption that we've seen under Tony Blair. If you look at the previous Conservative defectors, Alan Howarth, rewarded by a seat in the House of Lords. Peter Temple-Morris, rewarded by a seat in the House of Lords. Hugh Dykes, rewarded by the Liberal Democrats by a seat in the House of Lords. It'll be very interesting to see whether Robert Jackson, who defected before the last election, ends up in the House of Lords, whether Quentin Davis ends up in the House of Lords. And if they do, everyone will be able to draw their own conclusion.
OK, Michael Howard, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, an awful lot more still to come here at Westminster. We've got Prime Minister's questions at midday. You'll be with us for all of that, and we'll be watching every move on this day of high political drama. In the meantime, back to you.
Thank you, John. Now, heavy flooding across parts of England and Wales is continuing to cause a major disruption. Insurers estimate the cost of the damage is likely to run into hundreds of millions of pounds and are calling on the government to spend more on flood defences. Rising floodwater is affecting many homes in the Doncaster area. Rain will continue to fall over the next few days, but forecasters say there'll be no repeat of Monday's deluge. Well, in a moment, we'll be talking to our correspondent Ben Brown, but first let's cross live to Catcliffe near Rotherham, one of the worst hit areas, and get the latest there. Ben.
Yes, good morning. Well, many parts of the country still very badly affected by flooding, nowhere more so than Catcliffe here in South Yorkshire, where the floodwaters have really inundated this area. They have started to fall a little bit this morning, gone down a few feet in the last few hours. But still, if we take a look behind me, this is the scene here in Catcliffe. This is normally a roundabout, would you believe? Well, as you can see, no cars are going to be driving around this roundabout for quite some days to come. And the pub behind me and the phone box really completely submerged. Over there, behind the trees, the wall there holds back the River Rother, but those walls burst, and that's where the River Rother came over into Catcliffe, causing all the flood damage. Now, as I say, this is quite a dry day. There's a bit of sunshine coming through, and that is encouraging people who are stranded, who are not able to get back to their homes. They think that maybe the floodwaters will fall, but they're still worried that more bad weather is on the way this weekend, and that the Uli Reservoir Dam, not far from here, is still in danger of collapse. If that collapses, then Catcliffe will be flooded once again very badly. Let's get a picture now of a snapshot of what's happening around the country from my colleague Ian Palmer.
A few hours ago, the village of Sprotborough near Doncaster was like any other. But rising water levels has also brought rising tension and anger.
We've been up to the council all day trying to get sandbags, and, you know, if you look at next doors, there's been nothing, has there? They've been telling us that we've got to ring up and order them. Yeah. And, you know, we phoned up this morning ordering sandbags, and they've still not been and done anything about it.
Mark Kaywood says he also feels let down by his local authority.
Just happened so quickly within a matter of, 15, 20 minutes, and gutted really, aren't you? Police have been round, but there's been no sandbags, no help being given at all. Neighbours have been the best. Your neighbours have been great, they've helped, because obviously they're in the same position.
When the River Don broke its banks, it fractured the heart of the community surrounding it. Elsewhere, the misery continues. In Sheffield, as the water subsides, the clean-up operation is beginning to gather pace. The Environment Agency is warning householders to beware of mud contaminated with sewage. In Grimsby, the elderly had to be moved as floodwaters moved in. The fourth person to die as a result of the catastrophic weather was found in a swollen river by police in Worcestershire. In Shropshire, the damage is extensive. The cost of repairing the infrastructure is being put in the tens of millions. The eventual bill could be as high as £1 billion.
Clearly, the cost of damage is the cost of the damage to your house, the disruption to your business. It's extremely difficult to estimate that now because some homes are still underwater. How long the water is there relates to the cost overall.
Across the country, it's believed 2 million homes are at risk from flooding. More than 500,000 are at severe risk because more of them are being built on floodplains. Many of them are in the Thames Gateway, Ashford and the Midlands. Experts say more money needs to be spent to protect them.
We need money to repair the flood defences that are in place already, and we need money to build new hard defences, and we also need money to... We don't have to just have hard engineered defences. Look what's behind me here. This is an equivalent to an IKEA flat pack. It arrives in a few hours, it's innovative, it's cheap, and it can be rolled out very effectively, and it is holding back the mighty River Severn.
You can push away the debris, the memories may be a little harder to erase. The Met Office says the northeast of England can expect more heavy rain. The outlook for the coming days isn't looking much drier. Ian Palmer, BBC News.
Well, that's the situation, as you heard from Ian Palmer, back here in Catcliffe, where, as I say, the sun is out, and that is at least a little bit encouraging. But take a look at this. This is the bus stop here in Catcliffe in Main Street. And down there you can see, I think behind me, a red van. Now behind that red van is an estate where many homes have been flooded and people evacuated from there. They are waiting very patiently now in shelters and emergency accommodation, and just hoping that they'll be able to get back to their homes sometime soon. They don't even know the extent of the damage to their homes. But as I say, this is a problem that's affecting so many areas of the country, not just South Yorkshire. Let's cross over now to Richard Westcott, who's at Upton upon Severn. Richard, what is the latest situation there?
Well, we've got the opposite of you, really. The sun's just gone in here, ominous dark clouds. But the worst news is that I've been told by the Environment Agency they could be expecting another foot of water over the next couple of days, and some rain at the weekend as well. And the water's actually rising here. I'm going to give you some examples. If you can see those picnic tables there, well, when we arrived here this morning, 4 or 5 o'clock this morning, you could see the tops of those. Absolutely no problem at all. Last night, you could see most of them. If we go to the right, there's some steps that go up to one of the pleasure cruisers. Again, most of those steps were visible, practically under the water now. And if you pan a bit further right, you can just see the tops of some railings there. When I got here last night, when I went to bed, you could see most of those railings. So the water is rising here. That's the big problem. And behind me, they've got these new flood barriers, Swedish design. If we can have a little look down, they're very quick to put up, very effective. But the problem is they didn't have enough to cover further up. And the water is only about a foot below the top of them. They've got the pumps going there now, but if they can't keep that back, and it does go up by a foot, then it could be coming over the top, and that's the real fear here. Of course, people here are used to flooding. Someone told me we don't even blink when there's a flood. If you look at the 1947 highest level, it was about 1.5 metres above this, but they're not used to it in the summer. That's the big thing, and of course it's starting to affect businesses more than people here. But drive down from Worcester to here and you can see so many fields covered in water, and of course that affects the crops, and then you've got businesses along here that are desperate to stay open, of course.
OK, Richard, thank you very much for bringing us up to date from there with that worrying picture of rising water there. And here, as I say, the water starting to drop here in Catcliffe, but in other areas like Doncaster, around some of the villages around Doncaster, there the water is rising again, so further cause for alarm. That's just about it from us. Much more, though, throughout the day. Back now from Catcliffe to the studio in London.
Thank you, Ben Brown and Richard Westcott.
Just for the weather, a lot of you texting about the insurance position. We're just hearing from the Association of British Insurers that says approximately 1 in 4 people don't have contents insurance, so won't be covered for flood damage to possessions such as furniture, freestanding white goods that are damaged. If you have buildings insurance, which most people do, particularly if you are renting, things like carpets, wood flooring, kitchen cupboards, they are covered by buildings insurance. But obviously, as eventually the waters do lower, that's an issue that people will be looking more into. We'll have more on that a bit later.
OK, well, let's find out what the weather picture is across the country. Here's Nina Ridge.
Hello there. There is more rain in the forecast over the next few days, but today we're talking about showers. And as is the nature, not everywhere will see them, and most of them should be fairly light. We could see some heavier showers around Newcastle, down through Durham and in towards North Yorkshire. But you can see the showers to the south will be on the light side. A few places will miss them and indeed stay dry. During the morning, the showers start to get going across southeast England, but we do keep quite a lot of clouds, so fairly grey skies for the Isle of Wight and Southampton. For southwest England, we'll see a few showers here on and off throughout the day. A really good chance of seeing some wet weather across Wales throughout today. Across Scotland, some sunshine for Dumfries and Galloway. Some of those heavy showers also affecting the borders of Scotland and the southern uplands as well. Later on this afternoon, some heavy rain moving in towards the Western Isles, and temperatures in Stornoway at just 12 degrees Celsius. I think we'll see a top temperature this afternoon in London of 18 degrees, and it stays cool with more showers to come tomorrow.
Good morning, you're watching BBC News 24 with Ellie Crisell and Simon McCoy.
Let's have a look at this morning's headlines. Tony Blair will hand over power to his Chancellor in the next few hours after 10 years in office. The Prime Minister will visit the Queen this afternoon to formally hand in his resignation. Mr Blair is also expected to stand down as an MP. There's speculation he may be appointed as special envoy to the Middle East.
Gordon Brown is already leader of the Labour Party, and once Tony Blair has resigned, he will be invited to visit the Queen and asked to form a government. He'll then officially become the Prime Minister and he'll start a cabinet reshuffle.
In other news, floodwaters are continuing to rise in some parts of England. Dozens of people have been evacuated from their homes in Doncaster and 25 people have been rescued outside Worcester. The severe weather has claimed the lives of 4 people.
Residents of Sheffield will experience rolling blackouts today as efforts are made to restore supplies to around 15,000 customers cut off by the floods. At the Ully Reservoir, fire crews are continuing to pump millions of litres of water out of a dam to prevent it bursting.
The British Medical Association conference is to consider a call for quicker and easier access to abortion. The BMA's Ethics Committee says measures such as the need for 2 doctors' signatures are causing unnecessary delays. And there's more on our interactive news service BBC I, either on Freeview or on digital satellite. Just press the red button on your handset.
Let's get more now on our top story. After years of waiting, Gordon Brown finally becomes Prime Minister this afternoon. Tony Blair will step down after 10 years in power. Let's go over now to Westminster, and John Sopel is there. John.
Simon, Ellie, thanks both very much indeed. Well, of course, we've talked a lot about the ceremonial of what happens, the trips to and from Buckingham Palace, Tony Blair's final Prime Minister's question time. But at some point this afternoon, Gordon Brown is going to sit down in number 10 and some flunky is going to walk in with a whole pile of red dispatch boxes with the Prime Minister written on them. And then he's got to start wading through the whole different lot of subject matters that he's got to deal with. Maybe foreign affairs matters, maybe domestic policy, maybe security issues. The whole reshuffle has got to be done. So what will Gordon Brown's first priorities be once he gets in to number 10? Our political correspondent, Robin Brandt, assesses the in-tray awaiting the new man.
For 10 years, Gordon Brown has been the man in charge here, every week in this door with one single issue on his mind: economic stability. It's dominated, but now all that is going to change.
Getting through the gate to number 10 was only the first battle. Now he'll be in the spotlight every day, questioned about every judgment he makes in every area of government policy. Britain's commitment abroad is one of the first priorities. Will there be a change of direction under Prime Minister Brown?
We're in responsibility in Basra, but we're trying to get economic development there so that it is possible for the Iraqis to take over their own security and then for the economic development of that province to happen.
Gordon has huge knowledge of and engagement with the United States of America and influential people going back decades. Because of that, he can be more conditional, he can withdraw a little, he can become more distant without anyone ever sensibly being able to accuse him of being anti-American.
Gordon Brown has declared the NHS his immediate priority. He wants better care out of hours, but a pay squeeze is coming for the staff.
I want an NHS that is there for people when you need it.
I think the difficulty is that there are still some very hard decisions to be made, not least about moving a lot of care out of traditional hospitals, sending them off to specialist centres or down into local communities.
Politicians and the people don't see eye to eye, and the new Prime Minister wants to reverse that. He has one overarching priority. After Iraq and cash for honours, he wants to restore faith in his government.
I better let you get on with this.
There certainly is questions around trust. We've got to re-establish that relationship between not just the public, actually, but the Labour Party in the country, the trade unions, the ordinary members, of course, with Parliament.
Gordon Brown knows there is a significant amount of work ahead. He's got to prove he's different to Tony Blair. He's got to take on David Cameron's Conservatives. The next few months are crucial if he's to be more than just a short-term Prime Minister. Robin Brandt, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let me give you a piece of breaking news here at Westminster. We understand from sources close to the Chancellor that although the reshuffle will take place tomorrow, he is likely to announce who his new Chancellor is later this afternoon or early this evening, in a move to reassure the markets that there isn't going to be a sort of period, a lacuna, when there is a gap, where there is no one with his hands on the tiller of the economy. Of course, the speculation is that Alistair Darling, presently the Trade and Industry Secretary and very close friend of Gordon Brown, the man we know who's being tipped to become the next Chancellor. And of course, it was Alistair Darling who was involved in those back-channel discussions with the Liberal Democrats about the possibility of bringing Liberal Democrats into the government. So we understand that the announcement of the Chancellor will come this evening. The rest of the cabinet reshuffle, we think, will take place tomorrow. Now, when Prime Ministers go, it is a very visible thing because the removal men arrive and take all your possessions away. So what we're going to try and do now is a political history of Britain of the past 44 years in 1 minute 15 seconds. And so excuse the shallowness of the analysis that we're going to do. But if we look at the pictures now, I think we can start with the moment when Sir Alec Douglas-Home left Downing Street, having been Prime Minister for a little under a year. Harold Wilson then won the subsequent election in 1964, stayed in power until 1970, and then it was the turn of another Conservative, Edward Heath, who famously had a grand piano installed at 10 Downing Street. After that, it was Wilson who left in 1976. For the last time. Then it was James Callaghan. He stayed in Downing Street for 3 more years till 1979, and then you'll all remember those pictures of Margaret Thatcher leaving in 1990, her tearful goodbye after the defenestration that had been perpetuated by the Conservative Party. There we see John Major going. He went off to the Oval to watch cricket after he left office in 1997, leaving behind a bottle of champagne in the Downing Street fridge for Tony Blair, who has been there ever since. And there we see John Major leave. It is time to leave the stage, I think it was, that he said when he left Downing Street for the last time, having lost the 1997 general election. And there to give me marks on that ludicrously shallow analysis of 44 years of British political history, Anthony Howard, and I bet I get a B- for that.
No, triumph for potted history. I couldn't see any mistakes. Seemed to me to do it with wonderful clarity and economy, and so I give you 10 out of 10.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I'll cherish that. Now, let's get on to the serious business of today. Who would you compare this departure to? Is it like Thatcher's? Is it like Wilson's? Is it like Macmillan's? Is it like Eden's? Which one?
Well, the nearest analogy, I think, is when Jim Callaghan took over from Harold Wilson, who had done 2 years of his second term in April 1976. But the great contrast there is that Wilson actually announced he was going to give up being Prime Minister on March 16th, 1976. And I think I'm right in saying, I may be out by a day, that on April 6, 1976, Jim Callaghan became Prime Minister. So that was 3 weeks. Now compare that with what we've had with Tony Blair. I think it wasn't it John Major who unkindly said the other day that this was the longest and most drawn-out farewell since the Australian opera singer Dame Nellie Melba. And it has now gone on really, I think, perhaps a bit taxing on the patience of the public. After all, we've been talking about it really since last September.
I suppose, though, Tony Blair would say, well, history is written by the victors, and I want to write my own farewell.
Well, I think that may be true, and I don't buy the thing which is, I think, gaining in credence, that he was in some sense bundled out. I think the timing may not have been exactly of his choice, but he is leaving Downing Street voluntarily. He's doing it by his own decision. And any idea that rather pathetic little coup last September actually made him decide that he'd have to give up, I don't buy.
You don't?
No, I don't. I think it may have had something to do with the date. I think he had it wrung out from him as a result of that coup. This will be my last day of party conference. But I think he is going under his own steam and by his own choice.
I suppose the other comparison that is made is to the departure of Anthony Eden after Suez. Yeah. And, people say for Suez in the 1950s, read Iraq today.
There's something in that, I think, that the Eden departure publicly prompted by ill health, but I think we now know better. I think we know that Eden was actually told he had to go almost by his colleagues, and he realised the game was up. Again, on that occasion, of course, there was only those days MPs used to, not MPs, Tory cabinets used to choose the leader. He emerged by this mysterious process of consultation. And therefore, Eden resigned, I think, on a Wednesday, and Macmillan became Prime Minister the next day. Greatly surprising the press, most of it, who all thought Rab Butler had become Prime Minister. But the Tory party and the Cabinet chose decisively that they preferred Macmillan.
We were talking earlier that Gordon Brown is going to appoint his Chancellor today to reassure the market. I suppose because we have known that once Gordon Brown didn't face a challenge, that actually the Downing Street machine, the civil service machine, Whitehall, has been able to bring him up to speed on all sorts of dossiers before, so that it's not a standing start today.
No, I think that's absolutely right. He has spent, of course, a lot of time touring the country with the deputy leadership circus, as it were, but he obviously has read himself in, I think, by now, and though there may be things he has to refresh his memory on, and then maybe there are some things they keep to the last moment about the nuclear button and this kind of thing, but basically he's done his homework already.
Yes, and do you think it will be a very different style Prime Minister that we'll see?
I think it will be. I think that Gordon has invested in contrast. He will want, he's got already a tremendous contrast between him and David Cameron, underlined by Quentin Davis's famous letter this morning, but also he'll want to draw a contrast, I think, between himself and Tony Blair and say, I'm a man of substance, not a performing artist in the same sense. And of course, we have to say for Tony Blair that he had really transformed the art of politics in this country into a performing art, and I think that may be, he won't like me saying this, but I think that may be his enduring monument, that he, more than anyone else, was an actor and he knew how to do it.
OK. Anthony Howard, Tony Howard, thanks ever so much. You'll be with us throughout the day and guide us through today's events. We won't miss a single trick here today on College Green. We're in Downing Street, we're live at Buckingham Palace. We'll bring you every move along the way. Prime Minister's questions at midday. Now, though, back to you in the studio.
John, thank you very much indeed for that. It's just after 11:15. These are the headlines on News 24 this morning. And the Remove Men have been working hard at number 10 as the Prime Minister prepares to leave office after 10 years in power. He's also expected to quit as an MP.
Gordon Brown is already the leader of the Labour Party, but he'll take over as Prime Minister when he meets the Queen at Buckingham Palace this afternoon.
And in other news, heavy flooding across parts of England and Wales is continuing to cause major disruption. Hundreds of families in South Yorkshire spent another night in temporary shelters.
Now, doctors at the British Medical Association's annual conference are considering a call for quicker and easier access to abortion. The BMA's Medical Ethics Committee says restrictions like the need for 2 doctors' signatures prior to abortion are causing unnecessary delays. The Pro-Life Alliance says the Ethics Committee is out of touch with the public and most doctors. Well, Julia Millington from the Pro-Life Alliance joins me now in the studio. Thank you for joining us. Conflicting opinions this morning. We spoke to the BPAS earlier, and they said the proposals are very much in keeping with public opinion, but you say they're not.
Absolutely not. No, what we've seen in recent months is that the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists saying that doctors are increasingly unwilling to train in this area of medicine. A recent survey of doctors revealed that 1/4 of GPs won't refer for abortion, 1/5 say it shouldn't even be legal. And that follows 2 years of public opinion polling, which has shown overwhelming support for a change in the law on abortion, for a reduction in the upper time limit for abortion, and for moves to reduce the very high numbers of abortions that we see every year in the UK.
But that's the key, isn't it? The numbers of abortions are increasing. It's a very traumatic decision for a woman to have to make. Why make the process any more difficult for her? Shouldn't it be up to her whether she wants to have it, and then the process is made as easy as possible?
Well, I don't think the process is difficult at the moment. We see from the statistics published last year that 89% of the 201,000 abortions in 2006 were performed in the first 13 weeks of pregnancy. 67% were in the first 10 weeks of pregnancy. The process is already very quick. Abortion is widely available and easily accessible. And I think what we should be looking at is why there are so many abortions and asking women why they're choosing abortion and trying to solve those problems rather than opening the floodgates even further.
But that's something you consider to be a problem. But for a woman who wants to have an abortion, the problem would be having the baby. For whatever reason she chooses, she wants to have an abortion. Shouldn't she be able to do that and have that decision left up to her?
Well, what we hear from women who come to us after abortion, and many women contact us after abortion because they're so deeply traumatised by what they've been through, and I think it speaks volumes that a woman who's chosen to have an abortion would then contact a pro-life organisation for help after the event. But what we hear from many women is that they chose to have an abortion because they felt like they had no other option. For many, it's financial reasons or unsupportive partners. It would interfere with their career choices. They're still afraid of the stigma of having a baby on their own. And what we see is that the last 40 years have done nothing to improve the status of women. Women still have abortions for exactly the same reasons that were claimed they needed access to abortion pre-1967. All we've done is made the access to abortion more straightforward. We've made the process more hygienic. We haven't done anything to help women in need, and we haven't done anything actually to give women real choices, because women often say, I had no other choice.
OK, Julia Millington from the Pro-Life Alliance, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
You're watching BBC News 24. For those of you who can't get enough of me, we just throw me in every now and then as well. Julia, business news.
Yes, let's talk about energy, because apparently the watchdog Ofgem has now come out saying that those people who have prepay meters are being ripped off by the energy companies, and they're saying you should switch. Well, we've heard that a lot, but not by the actual watchdog before. So this is a big move. They're saying 3.5 million electricity customers and 2.2 million gas users use prepay and should be switching. Well, Sarah Harrison is from Ofgem, the energy regulator. Sarah, we're being urged to switch by everyone. Why aren't those with prepay meters listening?
Well, we've looked at this and we've talked to prepayment meter customers, and for a lot of people it is the payment method of choice. And what we're saying is that's fine, but you could find a better deal on another PPM tariff. And so the message today is there's about £250,000 on the table for customers who've never switched. Have a look around. It's quite easy to change your supplier and see if you can get a better deal.
Shouldn't the regulator have acted a little more quickly, should we say, with regards to urging people to switch if they can save money? Isn't it something that you could do more to help?
Well, one of Ofgem's main themes is to encourage customers to be aware of the choices that are available to them in the market. But what we've done really today is shine a brighter light on what's happening for prepayment meter customers. And that's why, on the basis of that work, we're coming out today with our strong message to customers to think about your options and maybe switch to a better deal.
Can't you make the companies more transparent with the way that they charge?
Well, there is quite a bit of transparency in the market, and this is a very competitive market. Suppliers are really feeling the pressure of customer power and are looking to make better tariffs, to provide better tariffs, for example, to those customers who need more help because it just costs more for them to keep their homes warm. So there is a lot available in the market, and it's quite simple as a customer for you to find out what might be the best deal for you, but do shop around and find out.
But there are still a lot of people who haven't shopped around and they aren't getting the message about switching. And isn't that when you step in as the regulator and help out the customer?
Well, we're absolutely about helping out the customer. It's about pointing out the choices that are available. It's about making the process of switching easy, and customers consistently tell us through our research that it is quite easy to do. And it's about making sure the companies are really, as I said, feeling the pressure of customer power and are wanting to compete hard for their business. And that's really what we're seeing now in this energy market. Prepayment meter customers, though, there is still more to be had in terms of better savings, about £100 if you've never switched supplier before. So for prepayment customers, do keep looking around.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed for your time so far today. And that is the business news this hour. Of course, whether you see me again will be down to Tony Blair or not.
Well, unlikely then. Thank you very much. Let's get the sports news now. It's still Wimbledon, and Tim Hemman's still in it. We must be into
I know
day
you're very
3.
excited by Tim Hemman winning in the first round yesterday, Simon. Yes, it's day 3 of Wimbledon. Tim Hemman is the last British man standing. He's back on centre court as well later. The British number 2 will face Feliciano Lopez in the second round after finally coming through against Carlos Moya yesterday. They resumed at 5-all in the final set after bad light forced them off, and Hemman produced this lob as one of the shots of the match. Eventually, after squandering a few more match points, though, making it 6 in total, he finally won that final set, 13-11 on a double fault from Moya, and he will be third up on centre court today.
It's different that he's a lefty, but he's a big serving lefty, and you know, I think the theme of the match was to try and make Moya beat me with his backhand when I was at the net. If he was having to hit a lot of backhand passes, I felt like that was a good scenario for me. And you know, I think that's similar with Lopez. If I can get myself to the net on the right shot and get him hitting these backhand passes, then I think that would give me my best opportunities. But there's no doubt I'm going to need to play well again.
That's Tim Henman. Serena Williams will open proceedings on court number 1 at 1 o'clock. She takes on the former top 10 player Alicia Molik of Australia. Now, yesterday, Williams had an emotional first-round match, on Monday, against Lourdes Dominguez Lino of Spain. She went to break down in the opening set and was so disgusted with herself. Have a look at this. She appeared to break down in tears at the change of ends. Whatever she said, though, to herself, it obviously worked. She didn't lose another game in the match, but she did admit afterwards she's struggling with a hamstring injury, and Molik is more than capable of causing an upset if Williams suffers another bad day. Well, the BBC understands that David Morgan, the chairman of the England and Wales Cricket Board, will become the new president of the sport's governing body, the International Cricket Council. The Welshman will take over next year. One of his problems will be to resolve all the issues that came up from the recent World Cup. There had been a bit of a standoff as to whether Morgan or India's Sharad Pawar would take over that top job, but they've now reached a compromise with Morgan in charge until 2010 and Pawar succeeding him. Bradley Wiggins has welcomed new measures aimed at tackling the problem of doping in cycling ahead of this year's Tour de France, which begins in London in 10 days' time. Now, all the riders, including the Olympic gold medalist, are required to sign an anti-doping charter in order to compete. Anyone who then subsequently breaches the Tour's doping controls will suffer extra sanctions, including a fine of a year's salary. Wiggins says he's in favour of any measure which prevents the chaotic start to last year's Tour, when several high-profile riders were removed from the field on the eve of the first stage.
It seems such a small thing, but it might be something that has such an impact as well. You know, if riders have actually signed their name away to say that they're not implicated in any doping controls or scandals or whatever, yeah, maybe it will be a deterrent. Time will tell, but I personally, as a Londoner and as a fan of cycling, would not like to see what happened in Strasbourg at the start of the Tour happen in London here. And in a way, glad it did happen last year, and we've had the controls and the, you know, things like the Riders' Charter come out since then, because we certainly couldn't have that in London.
Well, that's all the sport for the moment. Now back to Simon and Ellie.
Thank you, Dan.
Now let's get an all-important weather update. Thomas Schaffenack has the latest. A very good morning to you.
Hello, very good morning to you, Simon and Ellie. Literally just seconds before I got on air, the Met Office has issued an early warning for the weekend. There is a lot of heavy rain once again on the way. Not as heavy, but it looks as though once again we're in for quite a soaking, so round 2 of the rains to come. But for the time being, it's a cool and showery day. We're in between weather systems. One weather system here across Scandinavia, more cloud waiting in the Atlantic, and that's what's coming our way over the next 2 or 3 days or so, and that's what will bring the rainfall. But today, the main feature of the weather is the showery conditions which are affecting most of the British Isles. But there are some dry slots around across the country too. What is happening, though, we are seeing a very cool airstream coming in from the north, and actually have to go around about 3,000 feet up a hill to encounter some snow, believe it or not, today. July just around the corner. Unbelievable, isn't it? But anyway, across the northeast of England, we could see some heavy showers too, perhaps a crack of thunder. But you can see there's a lot of dry weather around as well, so it's not all bad. But the showers that do brew today are expected to occur pretty much anywhere, but very localised. So there, again, as I say, a lot of places seeing dry conditions. For example, across the southwest, there'll be some dry weather here as well. Maybe Plymouth catching a shower, 17 degrees Celsius. A lot of areas in Wales seeing some good weather, but again, 1 or 2 showers not out of the question. But a cool day, 14 on the coast, 17 degrees, for example, inland in the warmer spots, and 14 degrees for Belfast as well. Now, through the evening hours, any showers that do brew will eventually fade away. And it's actually going to turn a very chilly night, because underneath the clear skies and with this cool airstream, temperatures really are going to drop. It'll feel more like March in some places during the early hours of Thursday morning rather than late June. So temperatures in towns and cities around about 9-10 degrees, in rural spots maybe 5 or 6. And additionally, there'll be some rain heading towards the west of Scotland during the course of the morning as well. So how does Thursday start, that is? Well, it looks as though a lot of dry weather, sunshine around, but then this lump of rain starts to swing in from the southwest here. It will spill in to most parts of the UK as we head into the evening hours of Thursday, and as early as probably the middle of the afternoon in the southwest of the country. Now, Friday, we will probably see some rain just about clearing the south coast and the extreme southeast, with some showers behind it as well, but sunshine too, so it's not all bad. And then here comes Saturday. Now, this is the troublemaker. This is what could bring us an inch, maybe in some places a couple of inches of rain. So not as much as last time, but still it could cause some problems, of course, where we've seen the flooded areas. Of course, more on BBC iPage 401 for your regional weather forecast.
Get the headlines every 15 minutes here on BBC News 24.
Hello and welcome to the heart of Westminster.